the current talk is about the book The Rivers of Rigveda. So what I plan is to go through certain important highlights in the book and help any reader to get an understanding of the book and decide whether it is for them like that. This is a brief introduction slide. I think this image was taken some few weeks back, so slightly my mustache is not there. So yeah, and here this is the slide where I'm talking about the book. It's the cover page of the book. And as you can see, the book is endorsed by the research community like Dr. Elst and Dr. David Frawley, Vishal Agarwal, and Dr. Raj Vedam, and Ajay Chaturvedi and Manoshi Sinha, who have been writing a lot of books in dharmic space. And primarily the book is about the geography, but it also touches with the chronological aspects of Rigveda, because geography is inseparable from chronology. So this is just a slide which shows how the presence of the book in Amazon and other sites where it has appeared as bestsellers in the category of Indian history and hot new releases, etc. And these are the kind of outlets where you can buy the book, like Amazon, all the outlets across international, in the UK, all the different Amazon outlets in various countries, UK, US, Australia, everywhere, Europe as well. Flipkart delivering in India. In the Notion Press, the publisher have a location where it is available, both in print and as well as in digital copy, like Amazon Kindle, Kobo, iBooks, Google Play, everything. And I have also provided two additional resources for anybody who is buying the book. One is the platform called Dharma Digital, which has been spoken some time back, where I tried to bring in the dharmic holograms, etc. But there is a page dedicated for Rivers of Rigveda, where you can see all the digital maps which are published as part of this book. As separately, you can actually go and analyze them. And then my website Ancient Voice, which is established some 10 years ago, has got an entire text of Rigveda. Was the English translation of Ralph Griffin. But definitely as a help anybody who has to understand Rigveda in detail. And when I say it, because most of the time, unlike Mahabharata or Ramayana, the amount of understanding about Rigveda and what it contains, its content, is very limited. I'm able to understand it in all my conversation with the scholars and general public. So that is why it's important. Anybody focused or interested in Rigveda, understand the text of Rigveda in a little more detailed manner, and then a lot of interesting aspects in the Rigveda comes out. So that is some kind of introduction I want to tell. And those people who are looking at now what they will be getting when they are buying this book. This is the table of content, which we can see around 35 chapters are there. Every river, Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, Trishadvati, Abhaya, Vipas, Sudutri, Yamuna, Parishni, Asikni, and Vibali, and then Maribrata, Sindhu, Sarayu, Urjayan, then some of very unknown rivers like Urjayan, the Sarapas, Shifa, Anjasi, and Tulsi. So then Anitapha, Gomati, and like that. So many rivers are there. Why I'm saying is because many people talk about rivers of Rigveda, they will primarily talk about Saraswati, and of course a lot of books are authored on Rigvedic river Saraswati. But this is the one book in which every river, around 30 plus rivers in Rigveda, both very some of them very familiar like Satluj and Vyas, but others very unfamiliar. I have discussed even in the research community, they are unfamiliar with rivers like Shifa, Anjasi, and Tulsi, which are local rivers in Haryana. And many of the people confuse the Gomati River. So Gomati River is of Rigveda is different from the Gomti River in Uttar Pradesh, the Gomati River of the tributary of Ganga. So this is a Gomati River, which is a tributary of Sindhu, which is discussed in the Rigveda. Currently, it is called Gomal. Gomal is the name, which is basically a kind of a new rendering, the latest rendering of the river Gomati. Rigvedic Gomati is now called Gomal. Similarly, the Sarayu River, everybody is familiar with the Sarayu River of Ramayana, but in the Rigveda, the Sarayu River is a tributary of Sindhu, similar to Gomati, and it is currently known as Haro River. It is both this Sarayu and Gomati are in Pakistan as tributaries of Sindhu River. And during the period of Ramayana, that names the Gomati and Sarayu, because I will talk about the migration of the Ikshwakus. So they got transposed into the eastern geography, like and the names of the tributaries of Sindhu was transposed to the names of the tributaries of Ganga River. So all these things we will discuss in the talk itself, so that more details can be seen in the book. And I use Sanskritam because when a book is written in English, one biggest problem that every author face is that nouns, the very important nouns which are in Sanskritam, they get diluted. For example, when you write Rama in English, Rama, it can be read like anything, like Rama, or it can be read like Rama. So that clarity is lost when you write books in English. So to avoid that, I use the IIST notations or diacriticals, popularly known as diacriticals. So that I use. So every letter in the Devanagari, every letter in the Sanskritam is represented using this formula that is there in this table. And now, so these are some introductory slides, and now we are directly into the pages inside the book. So I'm just looking, going through the figures which are already present in the book, Rivers of Rigveda, so that in this presentation it is better to showcase these images which are already, these are all part of the book. So that the reader will get a very clear understanding. So the first and foremost in the introductory chapters, I brought in this particular triangle. It is the triangle of Rigvedic transactions. So basically, the Rigvedic text it is structured in such a way that you have three main players or three main entities. So the primary is the Devatas, Devatas like Indra, Agni, Varuna, then Maruts, Ashwins, and so many very rare Devatas like Ritu Devata, and then very rare kind of Devatas also is there. So I have mentioned around 200 plus Devatas in the Rigveda. And then you have the Kavi or the poet or the composer or the Rishi. So like Vasishta, Vishwamitra, Gautama, Agastya, and then very rare kind of sages like Ritsamada. So many Rigvedic composers. And there is a patterns. They are the kings and chiefs. So some of them are designated as Raja, that is king. Very few are mentioned as Samrat. There is Chakravarti Samrat. Sudas is obviously a big king. And then there is kings, many of the Ikshwaku kings, Trasadasyu. They are all like Trasadasyu's sons, Trasadasya. These people are considered as Samrat. And then there are chiefs. So they are like maybe lesser kings. So these are the people called patrons. And interestingly, like Sri Rama is also mentioned as a patron in the Rigveda, which many people may not be knowing. So that is the linkage between Rigveda and Ramayana, which I have prominently mentioned in my book. So these three, Devatas, then the poets and the patrons forms a triangle. Basically, what it says is the kings, they are engaged in battles and looking for victories in battle as well as in trade. And the composers or the poets of the Rigveda, they praise the Devatas on behalf of the king. and the devatas get pleased, and they give blessings for both the poets and as well as the patron kings. So the kings are basically funding all the yajnas and all the events wherein devatas are praised. And the Rigvedic poetry is nothing but this praise of the devatas, which are supported by the kings, and the rishis are the composers of this Rigvedic poetry. They are called suktas, and each sukta is composed of riks, and that is how the Rigveda is structured. So this is the entire overall transactions that is happening in the Rigveda. And what is the religious significance that we have is that the Rigvedic poetry is not just mere poetry. I mean, to call it just poetry will be a kind of an understatement. It has got divine syllables, so that it will create a kind of a vibration in the space as well as in the mind, and because of that, it has got some divine properties, and that is what results into some kind of blessing and progress and prosperity for both the reciters as well as for the patron kings. So that is how it has been structured, and each of these Rigvedic composers, they have all mentioned. They are all mentioned in an index called Anukramani. That is a Rigvedic Anukramani, which is something like when you are creating a article or a document, you will have the table of index. So table of contents or index. So that is the Rigvedic Anukramani. So it is a general misconception that many people popularly with a very shallow or a very far away understanding of the Vedas, they say that the rishis the rishis actually composed the suttas, but they didn't put their name on it. But it is not true, because in the Rigvedic Anukramani, the entire information is captured, like which rishi has composed which sutta. So, like for example, the sutta number 101, that is the first sutta in the first mandala. That is Mathu Chandas Vaishwamitra is composed. That is a disciple of or descendant of Vishwamitra, and it is authored in Gayatri meter. And similarly, the sutta number 29 of the first mandala, it is for the Devata Indra, and it is authored by Sunah Shepa Ajikatri, who is a famous disciple of Vishwamitra in the Pankti meter. So again, there is the 85th sutta of the 8th mandala for Ashwins by Krishna Angirasa, and it is in Gayatri. So with this slide, I am actually giving you two information about that. It is not true that the Rigvedic hymns or suttas are without any attribution, without any composer name. And second thing I am trying to bring out is the Gayatri mantra is very famous, like the Vishwamitra's Gayatri mantra. But many people goes to the conclusion that that is the only mantra which is authored in Gayatri meter. It is not true, because the Rigveda, the primarily it has Anushtup, Trishtup, and Gayatri. Then many other very rare kind of meters or chandas like Pankti, etc. So apart from the Gayatri, famous Gayatri mantra, so many Rigvedic suttas are composed in Gayatri meter, and it is a very popular meter in the Rigveda. And now this is the slide which gives an introduction to the 10 mandalas of Rigveda. Maybe a basic level knowledge that everybody will be having is that Rigveda is having 10 mandalas. But it is the order of in which these mandalas are currently enumerated. That is not the order in which they are originated. So, for example, 6th mandala is the oldest mandala. Then comes 3rd, then comes 7th, and these three constitute the early Rigvedic period. And the middle mandalas, the mandala 4 and 2, and then the late mandalas 5, 8, 9, 10. So only the last three mandalas 8, 9, and 10 are numerically and chronologically in the same sequence. But otherwise, the mandala chronology, it's the 6th is the oldest mandala, and this particular chronology is developed by Srikant Talagiri in his two books, I will recommend to everybody to read. And for example, the rationale also, everything is mentioned in the book, the two foundational books of Srikant Talagiri. So I have not dwelt deeply into the chronology. Only like I used it as a basis, and it's a completely logically very clear why these mandalas are considered in this manner. Because the sixth mandala, the Bharadwaja Rishi and the king Divodasa is considered as the contemporary king, whereas in the third mandala and in the seventh mandala, Divodasa's descendant Sudas, that is one of the most famous king of Rigveda, is considered as contemporary. So this all these relationships automatically tells you that this sixth mandala is the oldest, the third and seventh mandala is subsequent. So why the 3 and 7 both are contemporary and both are authored during the period of Sudas, but they are two different mandalas, because third mandala is authored by Vishwamitra and the seventh is authored by Vasishtha. And both of these two people are the gurus of two guru of Sudas. So Sudas had Vishwamitra as the oldest advisor, and after that Vishwamitra actually left Sudas maybe for his personal ambitions, and at that time Vasishtha took the role of the advisor of Sudas. So both the Vishwamitra has composed the hymns and Vasishtha has composed hymns. So they are spanning into two mandalas, third and seventh. Similarly, the Sudas has got a descendant Sahadeva, not to be confused with the Pandava Sahadeva, but he is the son of Sudas, and Sahadeva's son Somaka. So Somaka is more or less mentioned as a contemporary in the fourth mandala. So this is why this particular relationship between kings and ascetics. So, for example, the children or the descendants of sages who are composed suktas in the earlier mandala, they will come as the composers of the mandalas, the suktas in the later mandalas. So, because of the child-parent relationship of both the kings as well as the composers, we can actually create a chronology, and that is how this chronology is created. And you may be seeing the top level, there are in the blue color, you see a lot of the first mandala is broken up into small pieces. It's a very complex mandala in the Rigveda, because different part of the first mandala is authored at different times. So the early part of the first mandala is authored during the period of Sahadeva, whereas the middle part is more or less during the period of Sahadeva's son Somaka, and the late period in a later period contemporary to the fifth and eighth mandala. And there is another category, that A and B, the general A and B category of the first mandala suttas, which are like it's very difficult to classify. So more or less they are like later than the early part of the first mandala. So this is how this is the kind of a structure of the Veda. For a novice, this may appear like a very complex, but this is the foundation of any of the Rigvedic studies that we can undertake. And this is the next level detailing of the chronology, where mandala level we know, okay, more or less these mandalas are older, these mandalas are younger. But what about the suttas? So even the suttas, sometimes some suttas may be found in the older mandala, but they may be younger. So that is the situation. So that granular level understanding also we have, because of the 50 to 70 years of research on the Rigveda. These are all foundational things. This granular level. So Aitareya Brahmana is the one of the Brahmana text. Aitareya Brahmana provides you with like some of the late hymns in the early mandala, like third mandala of Vishwamitra, the green color ones, 30, 31, 34, 30. These are all late hymns declared by Aitareya Brahmana. Then one of the Indologists, Oldenburg, has studied the suttas, early Rigvedic mandalas, and this blue color suttas, they are all declared as late in the early mandalas. So this is like relatively later, not to be confused that they are all authored much later, but relatively compared to the other suttas in the particular mandala, these are later. So these blue color and green color sutta numbers provided by the traditional text called Aitareya Brahmana, as well as by the Indology studies by Oldenburg and other Indology researchers. So one point I have to make here, because this point I always make in all my talks. the Rigvedic study is supported by both by the traditional scholars as well as by the Western scholars. And we currently in a kind of matured research area, it is good that we understand that it's a collaborative study wherein both the traditional as well as the Indology researchers collaborate and bring out new insights into the Rigvedic text. And this is also an answer for some of the traditional scholars who automatically assume that all the Rigveda is authored at the same time. Because if that is the case, then there will not be any kind of statement in the Aitareya Brahmana that some of the suttas are late. So Aitareya Brahmana, our traditional text itself recognize that the Rigvedic suttas and mandalas are authored in a period of time. Chronologically, some of them older, some of them younger. So this understanding is there in tradition itself, not something that is coming from the Western side. That is the slide is shown. And now if I move it, this is the first mandala because I said it's very complex. So in order for my research, I have created a map of the first mandala so that whenever I am referring any river name or any data in the Rigveda, I know that okay, this particular data is coming from a relatively younger or later layer in the first mandala. So I don't want to go into details because it will be a very high level detail for the current readers, current viewers. So just move into the other side, which is more interesting. So here, whatever you are seeing is the royal lineages that are found in the Rigveda. So many of you are familiar with the Mahabharata, Ramayana royal lineages, like Dasharatha's father Aja, Aja's father Dilipa, like that in the Ikshvaku lineage. And similarly, in the Mahabharata, people know okay, Parishit's father is Abhimanyu, Abhimanyu's father Arjuna, Arjuna's father Pandu, Pandu's father Vichitravirya, Vichitravirya's father Shantanu, like that. But this similar kind of a lineage tree is also there in the Rigveda, but it is not very obvious. So you need in the Mahabharata, you can have direct statements. Okay, this entire lineage will be mentioned in a segment of verses. You straight away go and take a note of it. But in the Rigveda, it is a very complex and a considerable part of the research goes into unearthing these names of the kings and develop a chronology, develop a lineage, because these are not very obviously mentioned in the Rigveda. The connections are not very clear compared to whatever is seen in Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So, but this is anyway the final output, so that I'm happy to present this to the readers, which is also there in the book. So, the oldest, the most famous lineage in the Rigveda is the Bharata, and it's the same Bharata lineage mentioned in the Mahabharata. So the king Bharata is one of the oldest king mentioned in the Rigveda, and there was a lineage starting from Bharata called Devavata. Yeah, of course, Devavata is not very familiar because there is nothing mentioned about Devavata in the Mahabharata and Ramayana because this is a Panchala lineage. So you know that Ramayana, it is dominated by the Kurus, and the Kurus in general have an animosity to the Panchalas. So because of this is a Panchala line, they didn't give much importance to the Panchala line in the Mahabharata. But in the Rigveda, there is no such dominance of the Kurus, at least not in the beginning stages of the Rigveda. So in the Rigveda, you see the kings like Devavata, which are in the Panchala lineage. And of course, the name Panchala is not there in Rigveda. It's a late developed terminology. It only means that there was 5 confederation of clans. They decided to join together to form a Janapada, and that is why it is called Panchala. And in the Rigveda, they are called Tritsus or the Tritsu Bharatas. So Tritsu branch of the Bharata lineage, which is famously known as Panchalas in the Mahabharata. So they are both identical. So that's why I put here. Here it's a Tritsu Bharatas, and you can see here the Panchalas. They are all the same, but towards the younger side, they are called Panchalas, but in the early Rigvedic period, they are called Tritsus. So you have Bharata, Devavata, Srinjaya, Vadhyaswa, Dimodasa, Pradardana, Vijavana, and Sudas, like that, Sahadeva and Somaka. And descendants of Somaka, that time the lineage was called Panchala because it started having a confederation of multiple tribes, Tritsu being one of them. and this Somakas were considered as a separate tribe, and Srinjayas. These are all branching parts of the family tree. They were all considered as separate, and then there are total 5 such clans. They are called Panchalas. So this is the Panchala lineage. Then there is a Parthava lineage, which is the Iranian lineage. So you have kings like Chayamana, like Abhyavartin, and then Kavi Chayamana. And Kavi Chayamana is famous in the Puranas as Shukracharya. So you can make that connection here. And they are all very prominently appearing into the battles in the Rig Veda. So Abhyavartin Chayamana, he was a friend of Srinjaya. But after some time, when the Srinjaya's descendant Suda's period, the Abhyavartin's descendant Kavi Chayamana became an enemy. So these Kavi Chayamana and Sudas were mortal enemies. They fought a battle, and you know that name, Dasharajana battle. The Dasharajana battle was between these. Earlier, they were friends, like their ancestors were friends, but in their descendant period, they were having some animosity and they fought each other. And then there is the other Bharatas. That is, there is another lineage of Bharatas. Just like the Panchala lineage, there was another lineage of Bharatas. So that is lineage is here. The Riksha and Samvarana, Ajamala, Riksha, Samvarana, like that. And Samvarana's descendants are Kuru, and Kuru's like descendant Pradibha, then Devapi and Shantanu. So like many of the people can have a sense of relief, like they see the familiar names. Yes, the other Bharatas like are not very much detailed into the Rig Veda, but of course Mahabharata is a text which was actually authored under the patronage of the other Bharatas. That is the descendants of Samvarana and Kuru. Now, there is a Pandavas and Kauravas. So Veda Vyasa, who is a descendant of Vasishta, became very much associated with the Kurus, and he has created a history for these Kauravas and Pandavas, and that is the historical narrative that he has created. That is the Mahabharata. So obviously, the Mahabharata will talk a lot about the other Bharatas, but in the Rig Veda, exactly like in the case of like in the Mahabharata, not much is mentioned about the lineage of the Panchalas. Similarly, in the Rig Veda, the dominance is to the Panchala lineage, and very much less is talked about the other Bharatas. Only the king Shantanu is mentioned very prominently in the Rig Veda. The remaining all like just vague and very. We need to like make the associations based on some inferences and like conjunctures. So only the Shantanu is mentioned very clearly, and Shantanu's brother Devapi is mentioned as a rishi in the Rig Veda. And Kuru is not directly mentioned, but there is a king called Kurushravana. It is Kurushravana is there in the Rig Veda. And of course, this whatever the lineage of Kuru is not pure blood Bharatas. It is a kind of mixture of Ikshvaku lineage. And that Ikshvaku lineage also, it's not the exact the Rama's lineage, but a Western Ikshvaku lineage. That is called Trikshis. And you may be familiar with the Trikshis because they appear as like the names like Jatayu, Sampadi, and Garuda. They are all Trikshis. They are Western Ikshvaku people. That is why we have a synonym of Garuda is called Tarksha. So Tarksha means a descendant of Trikshi and a member of the Trikshu lineage, Trikshi lineage. So Trikshis is a kind of a western branch of the Ikshvakus, while Sri Rama and Dasharatha are an eastern branch of the Ikshvakus. So Ikshvaku branch has two divisions, western and eastern. And the western branch of the Ikshvakus and this Samvarana branch of the Bharatas, they merge together, and that is what the Kuru lineage. So Kurus, they have both the Ikshvaku and like Bharata, like ancestral bloods running in them. And of course, like for the Eastern Ikshvakus, the Valmiki has created a historical narrative, and that is Ramayana. So I think by this slide itself, you might have got some clarity about how the Ramayana and Mahabharata, two great itihasas, are connected with the Rig Veda. And similarly, if you look at this is a lineage tree of the composers or the sages. So you have a Bhrigu lineage, that is Bhrigu, Jamadagni, This is a Parashurama, and then he saw his descendants in the 10th Mandala period, and then Angiras lineage like this, and Bharadwaja lineage, Vasishta Shakti Parashara like that, and then Agastya lineage, Utsa lineage, and some of the kings themselves are peerless composers. Like that is what Divodasa. He's king, but also as a composer in the Rigveda. So this is another misconception. People have all the composers of the Rigveda are rishis. That is not correct. Some of the kings themselves compose suktas. So we have suktas which are composed by Devodasa, and you can see here some other bharatas. Some of them like appear like compose. Devapi, for example, is a composer. So like that, you can see some of the kings also become composers. Bharadwaja is basically considered as the biological father of this Ajamita lineage. Even though Bharata is considered as he mentions the adopted son. Bharata adopted the son of Bharadwaja. So even Bharata and Bharadwaja have some kind of interconnections. So those are all things therein mentioned in Mahabharata, and the same thing is partially reflected in the Rig Veda. So this I am not going into detail of this particular slide. Just to understand that, just similar to the lineage tree of kings, there is a lineage tree of the ascetics as well. And then now we go. This is all introductory chapters, and now we go to the 0 point of the Rigvedic geography. This is how I start the geographical analysis of the Rigveda. So the most prominently mentioned in the Rigveda in the 6th mandala is few places named Manusha and Ilaspada. Rigveda is very much conservative in giving names of the places. Unlike in Ramayana and Mahabharata, you have hundreds and hundreds of places, which I have plotted in some of the Mahabharata Varsha maps, which is all on public domain, highly popular. But when I started analyzing Rigveda, the very less number of place names are mentioned. But these are the most sacred place names mentioned in Rigveda in the earliest mandala, Manusha and Ilaspada. And they are all located in the Kaital in the Haryana. So this one slide itself breaks away the demolished Aryan invasion theory. Because the oldest place names mentioned in the Rigveda in the oldest text is about a location in Haryana. And there is no point in arguing anything like they're coming from Afghanistan and stuff like that, or Central Asia, etc. Because the first 6th mandala itself totally discredit the entire Aryan invasion theory. And this particular Ilaspada is called Shergar now, and Manusha is called Manas here. And there is another location on the river Abaya, which is a central river which is flowing between Saraswati and Drishatwati rivers. And that is currently called Gatli. All of them are actually pilgrim centers now. You can visit them as part of the 48 course parikrama kind of a pilgrimage program, which is in the Haryana. You'll see it. And this is the first slide itself. I am actually breaking away from the Aryan. And then I have more details like some of the rivers mentioned in the 6th mandala, like Yavyavati and Haryupya. They're all rivers in Haryana. So Haryupya is another name of the Drishatwati. And Yavyavati is another name for a old channel of Yamuna. So there is a western channel of Yamuna. Currently, it has become a canal, like Western Yamuna Canal, like that. But earlier, it was a river. It was an older channel of the Yamuna River itself. And the rivers change their migration. Rivers also have some slight migration. So rivers change some course, their path may migrate to west or east, depending upon the dynamics. So even within 500 years, you can see changes in the path of the rivers. So current Yamuna is flowing like this, but it was a little bit you can say around 5 kilometers to the west. The flow was like that. So these two rivers, Yavyavati and Haryupya, are mentioned as like two cows racing each other. Like that means two parallel rivers flowing. No, that way it is described. So in my book it is very much detailed, so I'm not going in detail. And this particular map you see is a little more clear map which I have created. So Saraswati and Drishatwati and the central river Apaya you can see. And this particular region, this is a rectangular region, which is called well defined in the Mahabharata as a four-cornered Kurukshetra with 4 corners like Tarantuka, Arantuka, here is Arantuka, and Ramakrita and Machakrita. All the current location names are provided. And this particular location is mentioned in the Rig Veda as Varaprithivya, that is the best place in the world. That is the reason why they call it is because this is their homeland. So everybody have a sentiment towards their homeland. So they call it Varaprithivya, Nakha Prithivya, the navel of the world and the best place in the world. Now, why they didn't use the word Kurukshetra? Because King Kuru was not born yet. And I have analyzed, and it was in the 10th mandala or in the late Rigvedic period, the King Kuru was born. And he was the one person who renamed the entire area as Kurukshetra. So Rigveda has now knowledge of the name Kuru until it is the last stages of the Rigvedic period. So that is why there is a Nakha Prithivya, the older name of the Kurukshetra, was there mentioned in the Rigveda. And is very prominently mentioned in multiple places, and I have given references in my book. And similarly, the Sapta Sindhu, which is the name, which is the source of the name Hindu. So this is a Sapta Sindhu is a kind of region adjacent to the Varaprithvi. Varaprithvi is Haryana. Sapta Sindhu is Punjab. And of course, earlier there was 7 rivers. Now it is reduced to 5 rivers. So the disappeared rivers are like Marutpratha, and there is a Vibali. These are the different channels of the Jalam River. So this is the current channel of the Jalam River. And Jalam River had an older flow like this. Instead of like merging with other like Chenab, the Jalam River was flowing directly to Sindhu River. And this channel can be currently seen in Pakistan in the hydrology maps. It is there. And this particular channel is called Vibali. And similarly, the Vitasta, the Jalam River had a different flow, another distributary, and that is called the Marudvitha. And it was flowing like this and merging with the Parushni River or Ravi River. So because these two rivers are disappeared, and currently the number of rivers are 5. That is Satluj, Sudutri, Bias, that is Vipasha, 1, 2, and Parushni, that is Iravati or Ravi River, 3rd river. And then Asikni, that is Chenab River, and this is the Vitasta, that is Jalam River. So totally only 5 rivers. That is the Sapta Sindhu is now reduced to Panchanada or Pancham. Only 5 rivers. Earlier the 7 rivers, now the 5. So that is Sapta Sindhu, like that. So the 2 prominent regions. More regions I have mentioned, like Gandhara region, and that is in the somewhere in the to the west side. Currently Charasada, the northwestern Pakistan area, the Gandhara region, where the Gandharvas were there. So Gandhara and Gandharva, the names are very rhyming because earlier the region was known as the Gandharva region. The Gandharva, of course, in the Puranas, they were considered as a divine beings and as kind of spirits. But in the earlier Rigvedic period, they were mentioned as people, the Gandharva people. And their residence, their domain is called the Gandharva region, and that has become Gandhara. And then there is Shariyanavati region, that is currently Takshashila, where the city of Takshashila and Islamabad, all these places are located, and during the Rigvedic period, it's called Shariyanavati region. So many other regions I have mentioned. And these are some of the kingdoms or tribes I am talking about. The Kikadas, this is like one of the big research area. A lot of researchers are debating where they are located, etc. So in my book, I have locating them. I have, based on my analysis, I locate them in between the Yamuna and the Ganga rivers. But at some point of time, Vishwamitra advised Sudas, like his disciple Sudas, let us attack Kikada. But Sudas have some other preoccupation. So Vishwamitra himself came and attacked the Kikada and annexed it. And then the Kikadas moved to the west to the east of Ganga. And so this is what all this I have shown here like this. And the Kikadas, what happened? They started migrating along the Ganga to the east. And this is the kind of migratory path of the Kikadas, finally ending at the Girivraja. Girivraja is the Bihar. This Girnar, that is the Magadha. So many scholars have noted the connection, the relationship between Kikadas and the Magadhas, because the names of the kings are matching. But one of the important missing part is the migration. And this migration you will be able to see only in Ramayana. So only a comparative analysis of Ramayana and Mahabharata, this Rigveda, you get this migration very clearly. Because it is mentioned in Ramayana that the ancestors of the Magadha ruled from Mahodayapura, that is in here in Uttar Pradesh, like that. And some of their related people have ruled from Kanya and Kaushambi, like that. So there is a connection, and finally they went to Dharmaranya, that is Gaya, currently Gaya region, and then to Girivaraja. So this entire migration you can only see in the Ramayana, and only if you read Ramayana and Rigveda together, you get it. And then you have this Malsyas. So in the Mahabharata, you have a Virat Nakari, and then the Malsyas are there. Pandavas live there in exile, this incognito, Ajnatavas. But in the Rigvedic period, the Malsyas were a little more northern towards the Yamuna region. And Sudas have, as part of this expansion program, Sudas has conquered the Matsyas, and some of them migrated to the south, established in Virat Nagari. Some of them stayed there itself. And Satyavati, the queen of Shantanu, actually part of this Matsyas. That is why you see Satyavati in the Yamuna region. Whereas the other Matsyas like the Virata and Uttara, all of them are in the Virat Nagari to the south. Just if you see how much time, 11:45. Yeah. So I will just skim fast. And you can see here, this here is this little more bigger map where there is a Virat Nagari shown here, and there is the Balaprithya region, etc. And some of the rivers I mentioned, Shifa, that is the Sahibi river in the Delhi, and then Anjasi, that is another name for Yavyavati, and Hariupya, that is another name for Dushatwati. It's also called Tulsi, and Raupya in Mahabharata, and then Apaka, like that. And Saraswati's another name is Veerapatni, like that. So here there is another Janapada, which is Chedi. This is also very famous for anybody reading the Mahabharata. Chedi, King Shishupala, everything. We know all of them. So the Chedis were earlier settled in somewhere south of Saraswati. There was an arid region there, and there was camels mentioned associated with the Chedi. Like whenever the Chedi rulers, they give a gift of camels to the composers. So this is another point why I'm putting is many of the researchers are interested in placing Rigveda into 12,000 BC, 20,000 BC, etc. But the Rigvedic data don't allow it because it talks about camels and arid climatic conditions. So such arid climatic conditions were available like somewhere in the close to the desecration of Saraswati. So when Saraswati, the middle part got dried up, and the southern part of the Saraswati got dried up, then the use of camels were required. So all these Chedi gifting camels, etc., indicate the Rigveda has been placed relatively younger periods. That is why I am placing it around 3,300 BC to the end of the 10th mandala at 1900 BC. 1900 BC is considered as the complete dry-up of the Saraswati in the middle part. So they're all matching up. And second thing is, you can see the Chedis finally goes to the Aidihasic location somewhere in the Bundelkhand area. Shuktamadi as the capital, etc. You can see here migrating. And now this is a slide which shows like in the Mahabharata we know Sahastinapura and other places in the Ganga region. But the oldest place, another oldest place is mentioned. It is yellow color. You can see the Urukaksha. This is considered as a trade center, and the Panis, the currently called Baniya, they are all derived from the word Pani. So they were the ancient traders who are mentioned predominantly in the Rigveda. One of the trade centers were there in the Ganga region, that is called Urukaksha. And this is arguably the ancient location where the Hastinapura city is built, later by Shantanu. And that also why I consider Shantanu as the person who established Hastinapura. I have mentioned in my book because their migration is showing it that like that. This is the Yadava migration. So Yadavas also one tribe which has conflict with the Sudas, and some of them migrated to Mathura, and some of the others migrated along Saraswati river and established into the southern ocean, like Dwaraka, like that. That is why in the Mahabharata you see some Yadavas there in the Mathura and some others in the Dwaraka. So this whole migration started during the Rigvedic period, starting with the reign of Sudas, the most famous king in the Rigveda. And similarly, the Vishwamitra's lineage, Kushika lineage. So Vishwamitra, as I mentioned, he started conquering the Kikada. And then slowly the Vishwamitra lineage also migrated in this way, following the Kikadas. Because in some point in the Mahabharata and Ramayana, you will see Vishwamitra associated with the Kanya Kubja. And in the Ramayana again, he is associated with the Siddhasrama. Siddhasrama is where Rama and Vishwamitra were together fighting Tadaka and Maricha. So that is the period here. And later you can see Kaushiki River. That is the river named after the Kushika lineage, the Vishwamitra's lineage, which is the Kosi River in Bihar. So you can see a clear pattern of migration from Haryana Saraswati region, going to Kanauj, Kanyagubja, and then to Siddhasrama, and finally to Kaushiki, that is Koshi River in Bihar. So that is the Kikada migration. And this is what I mentioned about Shantanu. So how this the father of Shantanu is Pradipa, and after that Pradipa Shantanu. So poetically, the Shantanu is mentioned as marrying Hastinapura. Marrying Ganga. But you don't know very if you look for very detailed, only people with detail, they will know that earlier there was a plan that Pradipa marry Shantanu, Pradipa marry Ganga. So first of all, like the poet mentioned that Ganga first proposed herself to Pradipa, and Pradipa said, no, I am not capable of marrying you. My son Shantanu will marry you. So what it's a political statement, like camouflaged in the poetry. So what it means is that the Saraswati was drying up, right? So the Bharata, all the kings, including Bharatas and Ikshvakus, everybody was trying to find out another better place. And the best river after Saraswati is Ganga River. So discovery of Ganga is one of the important aspects of the Ikshvakus discovered it, and that is what is narrated in the story of Bhagirath discovering Ganga. Similarly, the Kurus also discovered Ganga. That is means they also migrated to the Ganga. And that particular historical fact is mentioned that Shantanu marrying Ganga. So marriage of Shantanu, or the marriage of Ganga by Shantanu is nothing but Shantanu establishing himself in Ganga region. And things become clear when you understand that even Pradipa tried to, Pradipa also had an interest in establishing himself in Ganga. But it was not materializing only in the next generation, it was materialized. That is why the poet says Ganga first proposed to Pradipa, finally, but Ganga married Shantanu. Similar thing in Ramayana also you see look at. There was an attempt by Bhagiratha's father to bring Ganga. That is Bhagiratha's father Dilibai, I guess. So he tried first, but he was not successful and he died. And the Ramayana poet says subsequently Bhagiratha was successful in getting Ganga. So you see, in the earlier generation there was attempts, like even both in the Kuru case as well as in the Ikshvaku case, they tried to be in Ganga, establish themselves in Ganga. But only in the subsequent generation they were getting success in establishing themselves in Ganga. But all of them are mentioned poetically in the Mahabharata and Ramayana. And Varanavati, which is to the west of Hastinapura, was the capital of Pradipa. Because he tried, but he didn't get. But so he was somewhat migrating from this Kurukshetra Varaprithvi region, and on his way to reach Ganga, he established himself at Varanavati. And only later in the Shantanu's period, Hastinapura is established. And then, of course, this line shows like when there was a kind of a dispute between Pandavas and Kauravas, Dhritarashtra said, "Oh, you go to this west of Yamuna, because the west of Yamuna is their ancestral region." So Dhritarashtra is pushing them away into the ancestral region, which they have discarded earlier. And there is also a significance why Dhritarashtra was putting them into this west of Yamuna river, because their rivals Panchalas had earlier ruling from the southern part of the Kurukshetra. So it's a big story if I tell, because the Sudas, the king of the ancestral king of the Panchalas, have exiled somewhere or another the Bharata king, that is ancestor of the Pandavas, to west, and he lived in Sindhu region, like Sarayu Sindhu region. And Vasishta came and then he established an alliance of Samvarana Bharata with the Ikshvakus, but not the Rama's eastern Ikshvaku, but with the western Ikshvakus. Western Ikshvakus and the Samvarana Bharata, they got an alliance. As a result of that alliance, the Kuru lineage started. And the king Kuru came back and claimed the Vara Prithvya and renamed it as Kurukshetra. And what he did, he pushed the Panchalas to the south. So the Panchalas were living in the Delhi area. And finally, subsequently, because the area was not properly livable, they moved to Ganga and established in the Kampilya and Ahichatra. So Dhritarashtra was pushing them into this territory, which was nobody wanted it. No kingdom wanted. No people wanted it. So in that desert, it's a forest bushland. He pushed them. So these are all connected, and only when you look at through the data, you get this connection. And here is the Dasharajna battle, which I'm just showing pictorially. So it's one important factor of Dasharajna battle is now today our soldiers are fighting in the border with Pakistanis, etc. And very surprisingly, the Dasharajna battle, if you look at geographically, it is happening in the border, India-Pakistan border, because this Parushni river, which is mentioned as Iravati in the Mahabharata, currently called Ravi river, is actually a border river. And the Sudas was fighting from here, and the confederation of the 10 kings were fighting from here. And in that you see the Pakhtuns and the Baluchis, the Pakhtas and Palanas. Kuru, this Kuru is the Samvarana Bharata, that is the ancestor of the Pandavas. They were all together, and you can see the Abhyavartin Chayamana was the leader of this particular confederation. Prabhu, and these are the ancestors of Greeks and Albanians. So all of them fought with Sudas, and they pushed them back. So that also you can see here. And this is a more like the Samvarana Bharata is expelled from the Haryana region, and then he reached here, and then he participated in the Dasharajna battle. Again, he got failure. He moved to the, I mentioned, like Sindhu Sarayu region. So Sindhu and Sarayu region. Here he was living. And the Western Ikshvakus were there in this region, and they got an alliance. And finally, they came back and reclaimed this Vara Prithvya, renamed it as Kurukshetra. And these are some of the slides which shows the river dynamics. Like the river in the 4th and 5th mandala, you see the river is like this. Like you can see Kuba, Krumu, Mahatma, Gomati. The flow is like this. You see the change in the 10th mandala. Like the river flow become like this. Some of the rivers merge together like that. And now in the after 10th mandala, this is how we see it up today. So this is showing, and these are all captured in the Rig Veda in the form of verses. You can see it. And here is what I mentioned about the Ikshvaku. This is a very important piece of the book. The Ikshvakus migrating from the Gujarat sea area, because the Rig Veda have a lot of information about sea, much more than Saraswati. So their earlier location was close to the sea, and that is the Gujarat Sea. From there, they migrated along the Saraswati Sindhu rivers, and from here they diverged. This is the Rama's lineage, the eastern Ikshvaku going to Gomati and Sarayu, and this is the western Ikshvakus, Gomati and Sarayu again. Right, the Gomati and Sarayu both in the east. Gomati is in the east, Gomati is in the west. Sarayu is in the west, Sarayu is in the east. So like that they migrated. And another important factor is the Saraswati is also the ancestral Sarayu river, where the kings like Sagara ruled. That's all very clear. Like I have created a kind of a logical block, which will clearly show that there was another Ayodhya and another Sarayu, the straight in the Ramayana itself, because it mentioned about Sagara's son Asamanjas throwing children into the river Sarayu, but at that time, like Ganga itself is not there, like because Asamanjas descendant is Amshuman. Amshuman descendant is Diliba and then Bhagiratha. So Bhagiratha is, as per the Puranic history, Bhagiratha is the person who brings Ganga, and only if Ganga is there, the Sarayu, the tributary of Ganga, can exist. So when Bhagiratha's ancestor is mentioned as throwing children into Sarayu, means it is a different Sarayu. That is how we come to the conclusion that there was two Sarayus, which is evidenced by both Ramayana and the Rigveda. And so there are so many places where have corroborated Ramayana and Rigveda. This is one example. Like the Bharatas, in the Ramayana, people will be knowing when the Rama's coronation happened, Bharata was in Kekaya. So the messengers were sent to fetch people from Bharata and Shatrughna from Kekaya. So in their travel narrative, they say they travel through Hastinapura and Kurujangala. So this is another question to the people who date Ramayana in 5000 BC, etc. Because it is impossible. Because Ramayana straight away mentioned about place names like Kurujangala. So Kurujangala is not possible unless Kuru is born. So 5000 BC, there is no Kuru. Kuru is a very late king, right? Kuru is just a very close ancestor of Pandavas and Kauravas. If you enumerate Pandava's father Pandu, Pandu's father Vichitravirya Shantanu, Shantanu's father Pradipa, and one or two generation Kuru. So Kuru has to be there only then Kurujangala can be there. So when the Ramayana poet says Kurujangala, it means Rama is not very old. Rama is not very old or very far away in the prehistory. Rama's life was very somewhat close to the life of the Pandavas. So this is the evidence that is ignored by people who consider Rama to be a very ancient figure, using the Yuga definitions, etc., which are emerged very late. So you can see this is the Ramayana verse 2.1014, where they mention about this particular journey. So all these things are there. And this is many other slides, very many other information where the Ramayana and Rigveda are corroborated. Like I mentioned about the migration, like the Sagara, Asamanja, and Amshuman is the intermediary king. That time the Shagos were in Amshumati. There was a conflict between Amshumati is another name of Yamuna. So there is a Mathura, there are Yadavas. So Amshuman's conflict with the Mathura, Yadavas, everything is very clear. And then Dilipa and Bhagiratha. Dilipa tried to reach Ganga, but he could not, but Bhagiratha ultimately reached here. Then Rekhu is in Gomati. And finally, from Aja onwards, Aja, Dasharatha, and Rama is in the eastern Ayodhya, where they have established the new city called Ayodhya. And this is also reason why Ayodhya, the dating of Ayodhya, it is not very old like in locations in the Saraswati region. In Saraswati, 6000 BC, 7000 BC easily available sites. Archaeological sites are available easily for 6000, 7000 BC. But in Ayodhya, maximum is 1750 BC. Because it's a very young sites are discovered in Ayodhya. The reason is because it is established 3 generations before Rama, like Aja, Dasharatha, and Rama were in Ayodhya. So before Rama, 100 years before Ayodhya was established. And then there are corroborations of Ramayana and Mahabharata and Rigveda, which you can see, because this is the migration of the Panchalas from Vara Prithivya to Kurujangala. And this is where the Panchalas you can located during the Rama's period. That is why in the same travel narrative, Panchala is mentioned as located in the Kurujangala. So this anomaly, otherwise it will be anomalous. We will say Ramayana poet is making a mistake, but he is not making a mistake. Panchalas were located in Kurujangala region at that period of time. And then the Daityas, that is like the Zoroastrian text, the Avestans. So they mentioned about the 16 lands of the Ahuras. The Ahura, whatever in the Puranas we call Asuras, they are the same as the Ahuras. But the only thing is the Zoroastrian consider themselves as positive and they consider Devas as negative. So Rigveda have a lot of information about the 16 lands of the Asuras or the Daityas. I call it them Daityas because their sacred river is named Daitya. This is all surprising for many of the people who are listening it first time, but this is the straight away in the Venjidad, the Avestan text Venjidad, it is mentioned. The sacred river of the Asuras is called Daitya river. And here you can see the current location of the Paktas and Balanas. They were participants of the Dasarajna battle, currently creating problem for the world with the Taliban, etc. And the Balanas, anyway, they are the Baluchis who are on our side right now, but the Paktas completely gone. And here there is that migration start of the Paktas from here. This is the Gandhara region, that is, you can see in the Pakistan boundaries here. There is a valley like a Kashmir valley. There is a Charasatta valley, and that is the Gandhara. From there, they migrated to the Afghanistan and give the name Kandahar, province Kandahar. It's a later migration. And here, the entire history of migration from sea, from Gujarat sea coast, how the people migrate to Gomati and Sarayu in the west, as well as Gomati and Sarayu in the east. So that is what mentioned here. See, in the west they go Gomati and Sarayu, and in the east there is Gomati and Sarayu. And the ancestral Sarayu is the Saraswati region. So you have western and eastern Ikshvakus like that. And eastern Ikshvakus, Rama and Dasharatha. Western Ikshvakus, we have Jadayu, Sambadi, and Garuda. All these are Takshas, Trikshis. They are the western Ikshvakus. And there is a lot of river dynamics. This is Sarayu River and Arjigya, Sushoma, etc. I mentioned earlier the Arjigya and Sushoma, two rivers of Rigveda, where the Soma is very much available. They were tributaries of Sarayu River. Later they become separate from Sarayu and flowed to Sindhu River. And the Sarayu become a very, very small river with a very less flow. That is why it is not mentioned in the Nadistuti, the biggest data in the Rigveda. 21 rivers are mentioned straight away in one just single sutta. And here, the emergence of the Uttarapatha trade routes, etc., the Sarama and Pani kind of narrative in Rigveda in the 10th mandala, the last mandala. So towards the last mandala, the roads, everything started, the trade network, everything started coming up. This is the slide showing that. And huge amount of information about the ocean. They even name the different types of ocean, etc., in the Rigveda. A large number of information, much more than Saraswati is mentioned about the ocean. They are the most ancestral location of the Rigvedic people. The sea land, right? So you can see I mentioned about the Uru Kaksha here in the Ganga. So many other locations where the trade paths and trade centers. There is a trade path going to China, the precursor of the Silk Route. The Chinese civilization had a kind of a contact with us in the Sindhu Saraswati civilization, and then the Uttarapatha trade route connecting with Central Asia. Everything you can see a glimpse in the Rigveda in the last mandala, 10th mandala, etc. And this is the later period wherein there was a Vedic expansion to the Videha. And that is the subject of Ramayana, where Rama marries Sita. So Videha, one point I will tell, it is subject of my second book called Ramayana Geography. You see a very strange mention that Janaka was ploughing the land. So you feel it's something like a village. That is true, because the Videha was just established as a new Vedic kingdom during the period of Rama. So there was nothing much big palaces or anything during the time of Sita and Janaka. So Sita was more like a village girl, because just the urban centers were just getting established, and Rama marrying Sita at that time. And some of the rivers, the Kabul River is one of the river which is mentioned in Rigveda's Kuha. And there are some other Kunar River, which is tributary of Kabul in Afghanistan territory, is mentioned as Ashma Vraja, which I am highlighting because it's not mentioned in any of the books on Rigveda. And there are a lot of marshlands and deserts mentioned in Rigveda, which is why we cannot date Rigveda to a very ancient period like 20,000 BC. Because these deserts and marshlands are very recent, something like 2000 BC, 1900 BC period. So this indicates that Rigveda has to be dated to that when these particular desert lands are emerged. And these are the last slides in the book where I mentioned all the migration in a single map, which shows how the Rigvedic people migrated. See, this is the dark color is where the source, and from there each mandala progressively they have migrated to west, north, and eastwards, like that you can see here. And there are some of the connections of Rigveda with the archaeological, so I have equated the entire Rigvedic geography with the Harappan Sindhu Saraswati civilization sites, because you have all the tribes mentioned in Rigveda spanning the entire archaeological, the map of Sindhu Saraswati civilization sites. You have the central region, the Bharatas, and then the Ikshvakus, Anus, Refuse, all this spread in the entire Rigvedic region. And one more culture I have very much prominently mentioning, apart from the Harappan culture, the OCP culture, or colored pottery. It has grown like this, and this or colored pottery is synonymous with the epic age, the Aitihasic age of Mahabharata and Ramayana. So Rigvedic period, more or less contemporary with the Harappan, late Harappan, early and mature Harappan period, and Mahabharata Ramayana period contemporary with the late Harappan period after 1900 BC. And with that information, I am putting dates. This is the last slide wherein I was confident to put dates, and these are the dates that I am putting for the Rigvedic period. So early Harappan period is corresponding to Devadasa and Sudas, and mature Harappan period correspond to the descendants of Suda, Sahadeva, Somaka, like that, up to all the 10th mandala, Shantanu. So Shantanu is born in the period when mature Harappan period transition to late Harappan. It's a period of decline, and that is why you have the Yuga concept, wherein after a great period in the Krita Yuga, that is the early and matured Harappan, you see Treta, Dwapara, and Kali Yuga declining. So that decline is because the civilization was in decline, the late Harappan period, Kurukshetra war, and that period the Harappan civilization was declining. So all the poets represented that as a declining yugas. The Treta, Dwapara, and Kali Yuga, they were all declining step by step. And so here this another slide which shows the positioning of the Kurukshetra war and the Rigvedic period, like early Harappan and mature Harappan, like this. Yeah, I think that is more or less the end of my presentation. I'm not sure whether I crossed the timeline. I'm trying to rush through the slides and finish off it in something like 1 hour. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty much the content inside the book. And more details, I have touched upon only 10% of the details in the book. It's a book of around 15 years of research into the Rigveda. I started research around 2005 and concluded it around by around 2020. And took me 2 years to around one and a half years to write the book with all the maps, everything. Starting with starting of COVID, and this book is a result of COVID, where I was able to work from home, and I started around February of 2020 when the Narendra Modi ji declared that we have lockdown. Exactly on the same day, I started writing the book and published it. The book came out around February of 2022. Just 3 months now.
Namaskaram. First of all, I have never seen such a wonderful presentation. And what should I say? I mean, you spent so many years. So I am actually speechless. I've got a few questions. So one of the kings in the Ikshwak dynasty was Sharyati.
Yeah.
Saryati. So probably it is Sharyati. So is it possible that the name Sharyati was later adopted to Saryu River in Ayodhya?
There is actually a Swara difference, because Saryu is Sa, that is different from Shah, that Sharyati is Shah. And there is another location for Sharyanavat. It is both are Shah actually. Shah like of Shiva. So Sharyati has some connection with the Sharyanavat. I have mentioned it in the my book. But Sarayu is a different, entirely kind of a different phonetics. It is Sa, and I also given an etymology of Sarayu. Sara means to move, right? But if you are like a Sanskrit speaker, if you want somebody to move, like you will say Sara. Sara means just move. Like for example, if you are in a bus and it's a crowded bus and you want somebody in front of you to move just a little forward, so you will say Sara. Sara means to move, and Sarayu means it's a common name for a river wherein the water is moving. That is why it is called Sarayu. And there is a difference between the name Sarayu in Rigveda and the name Sarayu in Ramayana. The Sarayu name in Rigveda, it ends in the short vowel U, wherein Ramayana it is Sarayu, wherein there is a Dirdha. And there also there is a kind of double etymology. One is it is a river originating from the Saras, that is from a lake. That meaning also comes in. Similar to Saraswati. Saraswati is a river containing many lakes. And Sarayu means a river originating from the lake. And it have the root etymology also as well, like the water flow. The Sarayu with the short vowel, it has another meaning of the basic meaning is a water flow, because any river is a water flow, so that meaning is there. So that etymologically, both the river names, Sarayu with a short vowel, Sarayu with a long vowel, everything has the correct meaning. And Sharyati, because it's entire different category, start with Shah. So there is no possibility of connection, but of course there are location names like Sharyanavat I mentioned, where the Saryati has got a presence. Correct.
A few more questions with your due permission, Sangam Talks. So I read an interesting word, Chaimans.
Chaimana.
Yeah, it's a dynasty, descent, Parthav dynasty.
Yeah.
So I actually don't pose questions which border on assumptions, but this question is nevertheless tempting. So would you assume, or is there any basis to tie Chaimans with the Chauhans, the Chauhan dynasty?
It can be, like, I mean, I cannot easily dismiss it, but basically the Chayamana dynasty is it's not only me as a researcher, but even earlier researchers like Srikant Talagiri and many of the Western scholars have associated with the Kayani dynasty. So you see in Pakistan, some of the spokespersons, they are called Kayani. There is a surname called Kayani. And the Kayani dynasty is basically a direct descendant of the Chayamana dynasty of the Rigveda. That is a state. That is like a conclusion from Srikant Talagiri. I'm not. It's like a foundational. Talagiri's research is a foundational research for me, and he has identified this linkage. That is, the Pakistan Kayanis are basically the descendants of the Chayamanas. They are the Iranian dynasty. And of course, if Chauhan, the word rhymings are there, but it would mean that Chauhans are basically coming from Iran. But I don't know whether any of their family history they will be agreeing to that. And apart from the name rhyming, so yes, we need to look at their family history, and apart from looking at the name similarity, we need to look at their family history, etc., to ascertain these linkages.
One more question. So one of the Indic scholars, Mr. Nilesh Oak, has rated Ramayana to be 10,000 or somewhat like that BC, according to astronomical phenomenon. So have you also taken care of those phenomena while compiling this research, or what?
Yeah, I will tell. See, the Nilesh, basically when he put in the dates of Ramayana or Rigveda, the amount of data he is taking from the source text, like if it is from Rigveda, he has not at all considered anything. From Ramayana, when you take this information, he is only focused on the astronomical verses, which are like around 18,600 verses are there in the Ramayana critical edition text. With all the, some of the text verses are excised because they are considered as later edition. And in the 18,000 verses, the verses which are considered by the astronomy, archaeoastronomy researchers like Nilesh and so many other, that is just 1% of entire verses. So anything related to the positions of planets, etc., they are just 1%. Whatever my research, because for example, in case of Ramayana, 18,000 verses, I go all the 18,000 verses in the Ramayana. Every data available in every verse I am taking it. Similarly, Rigveda and Mahabharata. So if you just look at if your source information is very limited, like 1%, 2% of your entire verses, then you can come at a very divergent conclusions. So one biggest problem for me when I'm putting the Ramayana at 12,000 BC is because the climate is not matching. And very clearly, as I said, right, the rivers, the structure of the rivers and the morphology of the rivers changed within 300 years. So within 500 years, there are change. For example, Yamuna River within 500 years, it has moved 5 kilometers. So what to talk about 12,000 years? So we cannot distinguish even the current geographic current map of the rivers will not do any justice to something which is the rivers in the 12,000 BC. Entirely, totally, it will be different. That are some problems. Like from where you would get the data for the river dynamics 12,000 years before. You only have to guess. Most of people guess that it is exactly same as today. That is how they go forward. So that is why I cannot rely in that manner. What I have done is I have gone like not only reading the 3 books. It's a comparative analysis of 3 books like Rig Veda, Mahabharata, and Ramayana. And every verse I am counting, and also looking at connecting it to archaeology and hydrology as well. So in the Ramayana also there are mention of camels, the presence of camels, everything is there, and it also shows a kind of a scenario where the sun dried up, right? The middle part of the Saraswati is dried up. It's an arid climate is mentioned in the Ramayana as well. And another problem is about the name Kurujangala. So the name Kurujangala in Ramayana, which actually cut off your upper limit for the dating of Rama to anywhere like 100 years earlier than Kurukshetra war. 100 or 200 years earlier. It cannot go beyond 100 and 200 years earlier than Kurukshetra war. Because the king Kuru is just within 200 years to Pandavas timelines. So Pandavas are 1793 BC, which is one of the prominent date I put for the Kurukshetra war. Then Rama and Shantanu, the two contemporary kings, has to be dated to 1900 BC. They cannot fly beyond that.
Just one last question. So according to your research, Raviji, Ramchandraji and Shantanu were contemporaries.
Yes.
And one of the Ikshvaku kings captured the Gangetic area, which I think would be probably Bhagirath, correct?
Yeah.
Now, according to the Ikshvaku dynasty, Manu predates all these kings by several generations, right? Now, if you Kanpur, which is a few 170 kilometers upstream from Lucknow, I mean, so there's a Dhruv Tila. There's a mound which is supposed to be the place where Dhruv conducted his penance, and that's also the place where apparently Manu founded the Ikshvaku dynasty. So how do you reconcile this folklore with what you have researched?
So as you correctly pointed, see, some of the events, the Manu, all of this, the ancestral Manu, because there are many people by the name Manu, but the most ancestral Manu, everybody have lived somewhere earlier to the 6th mandala of the Rig Veda. Now you have 3 sources for declaring what the Manu did. One is Rig Veda, one is Mahabharata, Ramayana, one is Mahabharata. And the entire tradition accepts that Rig Veda is the oldest. So which is the closest to the period of Manu? Obviously Rig Veda. And within the Rig Veda, 6th mandala of Rig Veda is the closest period towards the historical events of Manu. So if there is something in the Rig Veda which tells us that Manu has established something in Kanpur, then we need to take that with a very high confidence. You have to take it as absolute. Whereas if you see that Manu did something, but it is mentioned in a Purana or in a folklore, which is like several years after the lifetime of Manu, we have to consider it as a later traditions. So there are so many such things. Like for example, in Mahabharata research I have shown, Bhimasena is very popular in all over India. So you see everywhere in Kerala, in West Bengal, even in Karnataka, you see rocks which say Bhima has pulled it. Bhima has sit on the like that. So many such folklores are there, but we know very clearly where Bhima lived and what are the areas where Mahabharata says that Bhima has gone. So if some location which are unrelated to, not mentioned in Mahabharata, but in the folklore they say, okay, Bhima has come here and pulled this rock, or Hanuman has jumped from here. So we have to consider it as a later interpretations and ATM. The right word is ATM. So how we arrive at the accuracy of the data and how you weight the data is because if an event happened, whichever is the oldest to that particular event, we have to take it as a higher authority. So in case of Manu, we have to take Rigveda as a higher authority. And in Rigveda, it is very clearly mentioned the locations like in Haryana, like Ilaspada, Manusha. Manusha is the place which is related to Manu that is mentioned in the 6th mandala of the Rigveda. So that is what we have to take it the highest authenticity. And that is in Haryana. And when you do that, you also are very much aligned with the archaeology because archaeology has the oldest dates in Haryana and compared to any other place. Because Birana is at 7000 BC, Rakigari is at 6000 BC, 4000 BC. So oldest sites are all in Haryana along the Saraswati River. And Rigveda says it is this place where Manu was living. The oldest Manu was living in Manusha. And Manu's son Ila, the Ilaspada is again in the same location as shown in the map. So that is how we have to go do the research.
Thank you very much for enlightening us with this knowledge of Rig Veda. I had been hearing about these 4 Vedas like Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samveda, and Atharvaveda. And I had a very, very high level idea because either it is very complex or it is not available simply, but the way you have explained in terms of slides, you have done so much hard work. So at least I could guess something from it. My question, I had put it in the chat also, was how to make it, how to make children aware of it. Suppose like my children are aware of Bhagavad Gita, there are 700 sloks, 18 chapters, at least on the overview and high level, they know about some 20, 30 sloks also. About Vedas, they only know the name. But if we have to make it simpler for children, then how do we make it for Rig Veda, say starting with, because I think it has main things, Rig Veda, and I myself not much aware before today's lecture. So how we can do that, so that it is simpler and easy for parents also to convey, because this is how your initiative of this 15, 16 years, and then I think you have made the best use of this COVID time also. Nothing could be better uses of this time. How to continue spreading this knowledge, and then I will certainly look for you in YouTube also. I'll share those links with my friends. That will be the impact of your this particular session. So for my personal query, how to make it simpler for children?
So just for providing some clarity, the Rig Veda is a kind of the oldest text of humanity, and different people approach the text with a different objective. There are researchers looking at the geography of the Rig Veda, like me and some others. They are focused on how the rathas are constructed, because all the different chariot parts are mentioned in Rig Veda. But traditionally, for our children, what is more important for them is the recitation of the Rig Veda from the philosophical point of view. So, I am not completely averse of the philosophical aspect, but only because since I am writing a book on the geography, I have focused only that aspect. But my writings about Rig Veda, which are related to the Rigvedic philosophy, because that is how I started. In 2005, I started reading the books of Aurobindo. He has provided the philosophical interpretation of Rigvedic verses, and that has that particular way of studying Rig Veda very much useful for the children, because see, in the Bhagavad Gita you have 700 verses, Sanskrit verses, which is a kind of a crisp summary of the Upanishads, and Upanishads are like 10 times or 50 times more in size than the Bhagavad Gita, and Upanishads basically is actually the essence of the Vedas. All the 4 Vedas, all the essence are like the entire knowledge of the Vedas moved into 3 stages. First, the Brahmanas are authored, and from the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, then so slowly it becomes philosophical, and finally the Upanishads, which is the 4th stage, where it is purely from a philosophical point of view. And in that, the concept of Advaita and all the Vedantic concepts, everything is there. So if you read Upanishads, basically you are reading Vedas, from the completely taking out the Karma Kanda portion, you are ignoring, and you are taking the philosophical aspect of the Veda through Upanishads. And Bhagavad Gita is an essence of crisp summary of Upanishads. So it's again a gateway into the Vedas. So if your children is reading Bhagavad Gita, they are almost reading at the entry gate of the Vedas. Because so I would recommend your child who is interested in the Bhagavad Gita, try to just one exercise. It will be very interesting. Find out some of the verses in Bhagavad Gita in the Upanishads, because many of the Bhagavad Gita verses are there in an original form in the Upanishads. Once they get that exercise, it will be like a very interesting exercise. First, it will be surprising to see a Bhagavad Gita verse in an Upanishad. Once then they will get a lot of interest in reading Upanishads. Then once you familiarize Upanishads, then you are actually at the gate of Vedas themselves. And then once the Upanishads, you can straight away then start looking at the Vedic Suktas. Second point I will mention, whatever I have done in 2005, I have memorized many of the Suktas, like Manu Sukta. That is an interesting Sukta about the Manu, that is a Rigvedic god, which is a representation of the Indra's Vajrayuda. And then Nasadiya Sukta is there. Nasadiya and the Purusha Sukta is there. These are all very famous Suktas, which have create a philosophical kind of basis for your children. Especially the Nasadiya Sukta is very important because it gives a kind of a intermediary between belief and non-belief. So it is Agnostika, like you have three divisions in our Hinduism doesn't ignore the atheism, right? So we have Nastika philosophy, Agnostika philosophy, that is middle way between Nastika, and Astika philosophy. So the foundation of these three philosophies, like atheism, theism, and middle of them, that is in the Nasadiya Sukta. So if your children learns Nasadiya Sukta, they have an entire foundation of Hinduism. And you can look at Purusha Sukta, which gives a very fine understanding of the social structure of the society, and help us to get away from this caste related concepts, because Purusha Sukta very nicely, very clearly mentioned the Varna system in a very correct manner, and every children should understand it before they get brainwashed by the leftist historians. So these are the something they can do, and only like if a child is also interested in the geography, then of course the books like whatever book I have written, then that will be very useful. My research is primarily like to corroborate the geography, because I have very much into the geography of Mahabharata and Ramayana. And before writing the books on Mahabharata and Ramayana geography, I wanted to sort out the Rigvedic geography, and that is the reason why I written the book focusing on the geography. Otherwise, a lot of my studies are into the philosophy which is present in the Vedas, all the four Vedas. But my familiarity is primarily on the Rig Veda. But the other Vedas I have yet to look at in a detailed manner. But otherwise, 90% of around 80% of Yajurveda is same as copied. It's kind of a version of the Rigvedic Suktas. Samaveda also. Only in Atharvaveda you have a little more different suktas coming, which are not related to Rigveda. So philosophy is something that the children should learn first. I have first of all I learned philosophy, Rigvedic philosophy, the recitation of the suktas, and only then I have enjoyed into something different like data analysis, etc. in the Rigveda.
So there are a few small doubts, 2 or 3 at max. The first one is what is the meaning of Trishti?
The Tritsu. So the etymological, like currently it is mentioned as a clan name, like the name that is given to the Panchala. So in a very simple manner, this is the ancient name of the Panchalas. The Panchalas are already familiar, right? The lineage of Panchali and Drishtadyumna and Drupada. So the Panchalas, whatever Panchala that is mentioned in the Mahabharata, it is a confederation of 5 clans. And the oldest clan which put them together, that is mentioned as Tritsu. Tritsu is a clan name, and you don't see the name Panchala in the Rigveda. So they are represented by their ancient name called Tritsu. And
Right.
if you know etymologically what Tritsu means, basically it's related to energy and very active tribe, like that kind of meanings are there for that.
And what are your views on the Huna invasion?
Aryan invasion.
The Huna's invasion.
Can you repeat where it is? Ahuras.
Hunas. What are your views on Huna's invasion? Is asking.
Huna.
Yeah.
Huna invasion. Yeah, I mean Huna invasion. If I'm reading it correctly, these are all happened during the post Mahabharata period, and these are all subject matter of Mahabharata basically. But if he's speaking about Aryan invasion, I have very clearly mentioned in the first slide itself, that very first slide, wherein the Rigveda mentioned the oldest places as Ilaspada and Manusha. The entire Aryan invasion theory just vaporizes nothing. They are all in Haryana. That is the reason.
Raviji, namaste once again. Is there any mention of Indraprastha in Rigveda?
No, it's not there. But the closest we get is the Shifa river. That is Sahibi river that is flowing to Delhi. The Shifa is mentioned in the Indraprastha, in the Rigveda, and Yamuna is mentioned. So Indraprastha is located on the Yamuna river. So Yamuna is prominently mentioned. Sahibi river is mentioned, that the largest river of Delhi. And the neighborhood rivers like Drishabadi, that is Chautang, and Yamyavadi, that is a distributary channel of Yamuna river, which is again flowing through Delhi area. So that much is mentioned, and it is hinting that the Tritsus, because of the re-emergence of the Kurus back to the Bharat, that is Kurukshetra, they pushed downwards, that is southwards, and the Panchalas were living in Delhi during the Ramayana, Sri Rama's period. So this much we can get by comparatively analyzing the Rigveda and Ramayana and also Mahabharata.
One more question, sir, associated with this. Since you are from ISRO and you've done so much of research, assuming that Mahabharata took place, say, 1500 or 1600 BC, is there any astronomical, I won't astronomical, but is there any ISRO-related evidence that connects Delhi to Indraprastha and all its present topographical features, say maybe 1500 years ago? I mean, any evidence that links Delhi to Indraprastha to the Mahabharata war?
I will put it in a different way. ISRO basically was foremost in discovering the Saraswati river using the IRS satellite imagery. So ISRO is primarily looking at from the sky, from the space. It looks at the topography of the area, like Vedic and Indian topography and geography, and it can discover cities like Ahichatra discovery, and many city discoveries because of ISRO. And River Saraswati channel first very clearly identified in the ISRO IRS imagery, etc. And to answer your question, primarily you may be because most popular archaeoastronomy dates are Nilesh Hog's date, etc. But exactly the same archaeoastronomy analysis is done by so many other researchers. I have already organized one talk, one conference in which many researchers in the Kurukshetra war dating participated. All of them are archaeoastronomy. That is same category of Nilesh Hog participated, and they use the same methodology of looking at the Mahabharata verses and corroborating it into the computer sky chart. That is similar to what ISRO are doing. The sky charts, they create planetarium software wherein you can actually look at the sky of 5000 BC or 2000 BC, etc. So there is one researcher called Ashok Bhatnagar, who is an astronomer himself, and he has using the same methodology of research that Nilesh is using, corroborating the location, the astronomical data in the Mahabharata. He has given a date of 1793 BC, and 1793 BC is also the date which falls in into the range of dates provided by Sanjay Manjul, the archaeologist, who has provided the new date of Mahabharata because archaeologists provide you a range. That is, they don't give pinpoint dates. So they give a range. The range was given as between 800 BC, 1800 BC to 1700 BC. This is an upgrade from the Bibi Lal. Earlier, he has given a date of 800, 900 BC. And Bibi Lal's same team, after 50 years of further study, they are coming with the date of 1700 to 1800 BC for the Kurukshetra war. And he is also the person who discovered the Senoli chariot, etc. So we have to take it very seriously. And with the confirmation of Bibi Lal, he has put in these dates. And in our conference, it was a surprise that Ashok Bhatnagar, who was totally independently, he has come out with the archaeoastronomy date, completely aligning with every astronomy verses in the Mahabharata. He gave a date of 1793 BC. And in the same conference, there was another researcher, Ramamurthy. He has given a 1500 BC. So these dates are not. These dates are all part of the same archaeoastronomy analysis, which also unfortunately gave some dates like very far away dates like 5500 BC. But then when that happens, what do you do? When you have so many dates, everybody doing the same kind of research but multiple dates, we take the date which falls into the another discipline. So you have archaeology provided range 1800 to 1700 BC. In that, your Ashok Bhatnagar date is falling. Two different results converge into the same place, and that is what I have put as a reference in my book. That this is the Kurukshetra war date, and I call it as a Dyaus Dhyara consensus. Dyaus means sky, which is the eternal witness of all the events, and Dhara is earth, which is another eternal witness of all the events. And Dhara and Dyaus, that is archaeology and astronomy, are converging on a single date, that is 1793 BC. And now if you ask me a question, Delhi, you asked whether there any evidence. You have it's not because of any photograph from the top, etc. Because the name, ancient name of Delhi in all the records, all the ancient records, even during the British period, somewhere during the around 1770s, 1700 AD or 1800 AD, it was Indraprasth. So it is not a matter of debate, because your name of Delhi as Indraprasth continuing up to our just 200 years ago, and even today there is a location, the name, that local location in the Delhi is Indraprasth. There is a metro station there, and it's all continuing exactly like in the past. So this is not something that you need to discover or conclude through some IRS remote sensing, but it is already in the historical records. So just to answer your question,
there's an addendum. So there's an incident in Mahabharata where when I think Ashwathama, or when Arjun throws an arrow, so that arrow makes Rajasthan a desert, something like that. So probably it alludes to a tectonic event where the river dried up or something like that. I'm not very sure. And then there's in Delhi, there's also a Najafgarh drain. I live very close to the Najafgarh drain. It's called a Najafgarh drain, but it's actually a fault line. Yeah. So would you connect that fault line? I'm asking this question because you are associated with science and ISRO. So would you connect that fault line? Is there any connection of that fault line called the Najafgarh drain with that incident which happened thousands of years ago when Rajasthan became desert because of the shifting of the channels of Saraswati and Yamuna and all?
Yeah, one thing, the events happened in Mahabharata. Actually, I'm writing a third book, which is of Mahabharata geography. Currently, I'm writing a book on Ramayana geography. It is almost 90% complete. So I will put in more details in there. But to answer your question, so some of the verses in the Mahabharata are late traditions, which are like excised in the critical edition. So this event you mentioned is not there in the critical edition of the Mahabharata. And even the other information is already there. That is the Saraswati desiccation. That is the drying up of Saraswati is already recorded automatically in the late Rigvedic mandalas also, and in Ramayana also. So it is not related to Arjuna's period, which is more little late into the Mahabharata period. So the three texts, the Rigveda and Ramayana and Mahabharata, they are all unanimous. The drying up of Saraswati, at least the middle part of it, the Saraswati dried up. Even you look at the Sagara story. Sagara story is basically what? They don't have water. They don't have water to actually give Udaka for their dried up ancestors. These are all actually indication of a dry climate. So this is all there mentioned in Ramayana and Mahabharata. And as I mentioned in the starting with the 10th mandala, so much of information in Rigveda itself, which is a dried up condition with the camels, etc. So it will not be relatable to Arjuna. That's what my point is.